So we are looking at the strategic business leader, and I've walked you through the topics. Notwithstanding, we are starting with the first topic, which is talking about strategy. So it is important for us to look at the definition of a strategy. So we are saying that various definitions are present, but the straightforward view is strategy is a plan of action designed to achieve a particular goal. So I hinted that we come out with a plan, and to come up with a plan, we come out with objectives. So planning is just about top management setting objectives that they want to achieve and how they want to achieve it. The how they want to achieve it, that portion is what we call the strategy. So looking at how to achieve the objective is the strategy. And strategies are not the same. Strategies are not the same. So the simple definition of strategy is that strategy can be explained as a plan of action designed to achieve a particular goal. So a plan of action which is designed to achieve a goal. So you have your goal, you are devising ways of getting that goal done. And that is what you mean a strategy. Strategy planning. We have types of strategies. In the first instance, we will have types of plans. We will have types of what? Plan. The types of plan, we have the first one. The types of plan, we have the first one. So the first one is called strategic plan. So we have a strategic plan. The second one, we have a tactical plan. Then the last one, that is point three, we have an operational plan. I give it the mnemonic stool. Right? So these are the types of plan that we have. I just give it the mnemonic stool, S-T-O. What is the S? The S here stands for strategic plan. The next T stands for tactical plan. The O stands for operational plan. This strategic plan that is invented, or there's a plan created by the top level management. They look at the overall strategy of the organization. That is what we call strategic plan. Then we have the tactical plan. This tactical plan is mostly come by the middle level management. And we have the last one, which is operational plan, mostly exhibited by those on the field work, right? So strategic planning, an organization process for ascertaining the strategy it should adopt, taking into account what they want to do, how they are going to do it, and what resources they will need. Strategic planning covers where the organization is planning on going, impact on the whole organization, and involves the long-term view. So this is very, very important. This type of planning involves the long-term view of the organization. That is what makes it a strategic plan. And by coming out with a strategic plan, we look at strategic planning mostly by the top level management. Note the distinction in what is meant by long-term. For example, long-term is different when comparing the airline industry with the fashion industry. If you look at the fashion industry, their long-term may not be the same long-term for an airline industry. So we are saying that in coming out with a strategic plan, which look at the long-term focus of companies do not tend to be the same. It varies. The case of a long-term of, let's say, technological industry, a technological industry long-term cannot exceed, let's say, 6 months. When you come out with something, it tends out to change in a little while. Right. So the technological industry, just like the case of Uber, when Uber came, it never took so long for Django and Bolt to come up. So at least in the case of the technological industry, a long-term definition by the technological industry will not be the same definition given by, let's say, the airline industry. So in our quest to meet our objectives, which we set these objectives we set at a strategic plan. These are long-term objectives. Then we look at how we can achieve those objectives, and that brings in issues of strategy. So the strategy to achieve the objectives can either be a corporate strategy, as you can see here. It can be a corporate strategy. That is the first one. Let me highlight that also in yellow. Corporate strategy. And what do you mean by a corporate strategy? It can be a corporate strategy. It can be a business strategy. It can also be a functional operational strategy. It can also be a functional or operational strategy. So let's look at them one after the other. The first strategy is corporate strategy, and it covers the big view of the organization. It covers the big view of the organization. It answers the question, what business or businesses should we deal in? That is it. So here it is looking at the vision and mission of the company. That is the corporate strategy. It is the strategy for the overall company. And it's looking at the overall company as a whole, right? We are not looking at a sub-element or constituent of strategies. We are looking at the overall strategy of the organization. Though we need the basic, like the functional, the operational strategies, which are the small strategies based on every function of the organization to add up or to accumulate or to lead to a goal congruence to the overall corporate strategy. But notwithstanding, when we talk about corporate strategy, we are talking about the overall strategy of the company at large. Then we have some strategy called a business strategy. The strategy of a single business organization or the strategies of strategic business unit. So a strategic business unit is given the shortcut SBUS. SBUS. Here we are looking at, let's say, one overall department of the organization. In some organizations, a department can even have a lot of functions in there. But here we are looking at the department, the entire department as a whole, that will give what? A business. Some organizations may be, let's say, a group of companies, and the group of companies will have at least, let's say we have one side which is an airline company, we have one side which is an educational company, another side, let's say maybe a football team. Whatever strategy we take at all these strategic business units of the overall company is what we call the business strategy, right? So those are the football team who have their strategy to make themselves competitive, such to create some revenue for the overall group. And whatever strategy they'll implement at that point to maximize their return will be a business strategy. In the case of, say, the educational firm or the educational company, which is under the overall group, can also come out with some strategies to seek to achieve a lot of passes in the case of, let's say, strategic business leader, such that they will tend to attract a lot of students who want to write strategic business leader in order to maximize the overall revenue of the group. And such a strategy which will be exhibited by that business level of the group will be a business strategy. So there's a difference between the overall company strategy and the business strategy and a functional or operational strategy. So let's come to the operational or functional strategy. First of all, we have to understand what a function of organization is. The function of organization can be, let's say, an IT department. And their function is to look at all IT sort of issues of the company. We can have human resource department. They look at recruitment, they look at coaching and all those sort of issues. We can have, let's say, the legal department of an organization. They actually help the organization in terms of compliance with laws and regulations, and also assisting the organization in terms of in instances where they are faced with a lawsuit, or in instances where they are really giving guide to the organization about legal matters, right? So all these functions of the organization, including the procurement, sales, all these are functions, right? If they come out with their own strategy, so the sales department, the sales unit or the sales as a function can also come out with their own strategy of maximizing what? Their market share. And in that case, it becomes what? A functional strategy. The function of the organization depends on the nature of the organization as a whole. If the organization is a huge one, then we will have the HR department even different from the legal department. But I tell you, some small businesses tends to have, let's say, an accountant who tends to act as a human resource manager, also act as an IT expert, act as a legal expert. It depends on the nature of the business and the level of tax that the individual you have employed can also pick up. But in our ideal sense, if the resources are available, there's supposed to be segregation of what duties, right? So the functional or the operational strategy tends to lead into the business strategy, and the business strategy tends to also lead into the corporate strategy, right? So just pardon me for me to show you by what diagrammatic representation. For me to show you by diagrammatic representation, right? So we will have this item here, which is the functional strategy being leading to the business strategy. Then you end up seeing the business strategy, which is also leading to the corporate strategy. So overall, it is just the subunit which will now lead to the mini big unit, and the mini big unit will also lead to what corporate strategy. So all these strategies are supposed to what come together to make sure that the overall company strategy is being what achieved. So you have looked at the types of strategies. Let's move on. It is important that the strategies support each other, as you have explained. Then there's that sort of interrelationship. For example, if the business strategy of SBU revolves around providing high quality consultancy advice on certain areas, a functional strategy for HRM, that's the human resource manager, of minimizing labor costs would cause problems. What are we saying over here? If you are looking at providing high quality consultancy services, meanwhile, the human resource management or the human resource department are not recruiting guys who are really sharp or smart to help you provide a quality consultant services, then your overall company objective will not be achieved. What are we saying here? We are saying that every strategy based on every level, either functional or business or corporate strategy, is supposed to be on point. So those at the functional side who are coming out with the functional strategy should do proper recruitment. So the human resource department should recruit sharp, smart guys who can take up a lot of load, right? And if they are able to do that right, then the business strategy will also be achieved. And the business strategy might be to provide high quality consultancy advices. And they cannot get that done without looking at the efforts exhibited by the functional or the operational strategy, right? So we are saying that one big guys who actually talk about the model of strategic planning are Johnson Scholes and Worthington. Johnson Scholes and Worthington. They came out with a model on strategic planning, and they came out with strategic position. If you want to come out with a strategic plan, you are supposed to come out with a strategic position. Then you come out with a strategic choice. Then finally, you look at strategic implementation. So according to Johnson Scholes and Worthington, these three guys, they are saying that to come out with strategic planning, if you want to come out with strategic planning or you want to do strategic planning, you are to look at it from three main areas: strategic position, strategic choices, strategic implementation, right? It is important for us to look at each in turn, understand, so that we can move on. Strategic position. Strategic position. What do you mean by a strategic position? Strategic position look at analysis of external environment, internal capabilities, culture, and stakeholders. These affect the present and future success of the organization. So if you are coming out with a strategic plan, your plan should have a strategic position. Some people want to come out with maybe a business and your location is absolutely wrong. If your location is wrong, you're being affected. There are instances where you can really convey your product into the minds and heads of customers. If you actually position your advertisement at a point where all the time individuals go to watch, let's say, some videos or go to entertain themselves, then at least we can say that you have a strategic position. You want to maximize sales. Meanwhile, your advertisement does not get to the general public. Then you do not have strategic position. But whether we on our television, you put on our mobile phone, whether we just buy a newspaper, whether we go to YouTube or wherever, if your advertisement is over, in that case, we say you have strategic position to creating awareness. So in coming out a strategic position should look at analysis of the external environment, As we know, there's no business which exists in a vacuum. Every business is having external stakeholders, which it tends to affect and is being affected, right? Then we have internal capabilities. Internal capabilities should also be looked at in coming out with what? Strategic position. If you have not assessed yourself internally to know your strengths and weaknesses, how do you be of best fit to the external environment, right? We should also look at culture. As a result of having that sort of strategic position, the culture of the environment also tends to influence you. And lastly, the stakeholders. So here we are looking at strategic position, and whatever you tend to come out will affect you in the current situation and the long term. Then we come to the next element, according to Joseph Scholes and Worthington, which is strategic choice. Strategic choice, what are we talking about here? We are looking at how to compete. In fact, you can decide to go compete with the big guys. You can decide to compete with the small guys. Everything is a matter of choice. There can be a direction of growth, right? That is how you want to grow, either by acquisition, either by organic. In fact, it depends on you, and you can make that strategic choice. But that strategic choice should have also a link with also the strategic position. So the last element is what you call the method of growth. The method of growth, the direction of growth tends to affect your choice. Here we are making a selection of the strategic decision. The position will give you the platform, the choice you are supposed to tell or state which of them would like to go for. And lastly, the implementation or the strategic implementation talks about now putting all those things into practice. You have made your choice. First of all, you decided that you're making a position by marketing to, let's say, university students. So you have gotten your position and you know how to market to these students. Your choice is that you are not going to market all lecture notes to them. You're only marketing, let's say, strategic business leader notes to them. So you have decided on what product, what choice of product to go in for, and also how you want to do it. But at the implementation stage, this is when you put it into practice. And by putting it in practice, we can look at the structure of the organization. Sometimes, whatever to be implemented are to be implemented by, let's say, the subordinates. Or we can also look at it from the point of resource planning. Because at this point in time, we are implementing it, we have to look at the resources and also look at managing change. Managing change, what are we talking about over here? There are instances where, as a result of implementing your strategy, there may be changes because we do not exist in an environment which does not change. We exist in a changing environment. So we should also look at how we can manage change in instances where the factors of the environment tends towards change. In your quest of meeting your objectives, the objectives will come up when there's a strategic plan, and you are supposed to create strategies to meet the objectives so that we can fulfill our objectives or achieve our objectives. But there are instances where there can be a strategic drift. That is when we try to move away from the overall objective or the overall focus. You are implementing a strategy to maximize let's say, the number of customers that you have. But there can be an instance where you can drift from your normal actions. You are marketing to increase your sales. It might happen that you are actually coming out with something which can even distort what action that you are coming out with. And that is what we call strategic drift. So we explain it as a situation. Strategic drift is a situation where organization strategy gradually moves away from the forces at work in its environment. So that's what we call the strategic drift. And a lot of students tend to get themselves affected when we are looking at strategic drifts. So chapter 1 in summary has been digested. We'll move on to chapter number 2. Right? Chapter number 2 is talking about strategic analysis. Right? The word strategic is telling us that these things or these analysis are being made by those at the top level management. So strategic analysis, that is the next documents we are looking at, and we tend to look at the overall picture, what this chapter is telling us, right? So in order to design suitable strategic plans, Joseph Scholes and Worthington has informed us how to come up with a plan in terms of those 3 perspectives. right? So we are saying that in order to design suitable, the word is suitable. We look at it later on. Suitable. Let me just highlight it in yellow. In order to design suitable strategic plans, an organization needs to analyze its strategic position. This includes analysis of the external environment. We've talked about these things earlier on. Strategic position. What do you look at in strategic position? We talk about an analysis of the external environment, internal capabilities, culture, and stakeholders. That is strategic position. But in analyzing your strategic position, we will look at analysis of the external environment, analysis of internal capabilities, and those what nitty-gritties. So we are looking at strategic analysis of what? Your position. So in order to design suitable strategic plans, an organization needs to analyze its strategic position. This includes analysis of the external environment and internal capabilities that the organization possesses. So if you are looking at analyzing your strategic position, we are looking at analysis of our external environment, analysis of internal capabilities that the organization possesses. So for now, the analysis of strategic position that we are looking at, we are not looking at all the perspectives that we talked about. What are the perspectives under strategic position? That is analysis of external environment, internal capabilities, culture, and stakeholders. We'll come later on to look at culture according to Charles Handy, and we come to stakeholder management according to issues of Mengele matrix. But at the moment, we are looking at the two main elements under strategic position. We are going to analyze them: external environment, internal capabilities. This chapter looks at a number of metrics of reviewing the environment surrounding an organization. It then goes on to examine strategic capabilities and value chain analysis. So in our quest to look at the external environment, we are looking at our strengths pertaining to strengths and weaknesses of the external capabilities, such as strategic capabilities. That we are looking at our internal capabilities, and that is talking about strategic capabilities. There can also be capabilities coming from the environment, which we can also analyze. And in that case, I'll also highlight it yellow. And the value chain analysis, it is also important thing to look at. It's also important thing to look at, right? So I'll also highlight that in yellow, right? So we start. In looking at your environment, we cannot do away with one model called the pestle analysis. The pestle analysis. If the organization is looking at its impact on the environment, we can look at what we call pestle analysis. So key knowledge, pestle, sometimes called pest, sometimes called slept by some providers. An analysis of the external macro environment. We have a micro environment and a macro environment, right? When we talk about micro environment, we are looking at it in the case of, let's say, a normal organization level. We are looking at macro, look at the organization and the outside world at large, including the impact of governmental activities. So an analysis of the external macro environment. The organization is unlikely to be able to influence these factors, but it should have an awareness of the issues. So first of all, if you want to look at dealing with the external environment, then you are to rely on pestle analysis. You are to know the elements under this analysis. They look at how your company can influence that or can be affected by that. So the first one is what we call political indicator. The political indicator, we're talking about global, national, and local changes and trends. Issues like taxation policies, relationship between certain countries. If you exist as an organization, there can be a political factors, which you are actually competing with other global industries, national industries, local industries, and the certain trends that tends out to happen in the political terrain. If your country, you are going to vote, you know for sure that that political status can affect business activities, right? So in your quest as a business, meeting your objective, looking at your in and out sort of issues, you are not supposed to forget the impact of political indicators, right? Taxation policies can also affect you as an organization. So in analyzing and knowing what is in the environment, there can be good things and bad things in the environment, tends to affect you. So it is important for us to look at political. And the next one is economic. Economic factors can also be issues like exchange rates, the link to topical issues such as global recession, current interest rates for funding. All these factors tend to what affects businesses. The next one is social factors. Social factors, what are we talking about? We're talking about changes in behavior. The consumer's behavior, if the consumer's behavior tends to change, it tends to affect demand. So social factors, we're talking about the social life of the individuals. And that is in relation to changes in behavior, expectations in society, demographics, lifestyles, all these pertain to social factors under the PESTEL analysis. Then we come to technological factor. The technological factor, we look at changes including hardware, software, electronic issues, materials and services, or global communications. Anything which affect the technological industry should be considered, because now a lot of providers are looking at online studies or online tuition because of the existence of the pandemic. And you can see how now tuitions has moved right away from the face-to-face perspective to the online class. Though the online class has been in existence for long, but it actually became a sort of issue for every provider to look at when the pandemic actually came up, right? So we have the next one, which is also called environmental. Environmental, what are we looking at? What are the environmental considerations such as recycling, pollution, attitude of the media, customers, etc. And the last perspective, we are talking about legal factors. Legal factors, we are talking about the legislations, the laws and regulations coming up in the country, coming out maybe the outside world, all tends to affect what businesses. So changes and predicted changes to regional, especially the European Union and the national legislation, regulatory bodies, changes to employment law, all these things tends to affect an organization. If an organization is looking at the external focus, how they tend to be impacted or they tend to impact the external environment, one model that we can look at is what we call the PESTEL analysis. P stands for political, E stands for economic, S stands for social, T stands for technological, E stands for environmental, and L stands for legal. Some providers do not talk about PESTEL, they look at PEST or sometimes SLEPT in that regard, right? So we move on to the next one, key knowledge. Another factor or another model we can look at in looking at the relationship between organization and its environment. We've already looked at PESTEL analysis. The next one that we are looking at is in the case of Porter 5 forces. That is Michael Porter. And Michael Porter does beautiful sort of issue pertaining to that. This is an old technical article released by Michael Porter, and since it came up, it has been an area of focus for every business. And it's really important for every business who want to survive in the short term, in the long term, to look at the clues given by Michael Porter. And he said that businesses are being affected, right? As you tend to move as business, we have some strange which tends to affect you as a business. And every business is having certain things which tends to affect them as they tend to exist and to also be as competitive as they want to be. And according to Michael Porter, we are looking at the 5 forces, Porter 5 forces. So this model examines the role of 5 forces that determine how attractive a particular market or industry is. So if you want to really enter into an industry, let's say you have conceived some business and you are looking at the industry to enter into, it is important for you to make an assessment before you even start to even incur huge costs into this project. You're supposed to look at the principles of Michael Porter. If you want to come out with, let's say, cosmetic business, right? You are supposed to sit down and look at Michael Porter 5 forces. We are supposed to apply all that we are learning. That is why I all the time say that professional students are to look at what they are learning and try to implement what they are learning in their lives, right? So if I want to come out with, let's say, cosmetic business, I am supposed to look at the principles of Michael Porter, that is his 5 forces, before I even tend to invest into the cosmetic business and even tend to maybe be in it for, let's say, 1 month, 2 months, 1 year, 2 years, or whatever. We are supposed to look at issues of suppliers. As you want to get into this business, suppliers, whatever the case, you need your suppliers. You need customers. You should think about issues of what? New entrants into the market who can affect you as a result of you getting in there. And I cite the example of issues of Uber. When Uber came to Ghana, per my knowledge, when Uber came to Ghana, the other Bolt and Yango, they were not in existence. But you know for sure that as individual tends to realize that the business is getting lucrative, they tend to come out with some imitation, right? They tend to come out with some imitation. So as you tend to exist for some time and are getting most of the market, you are to also think about entrance into the market, right? That is why some people come out with copyright to protect themselves. We are supposed to also look at issues of substitute. And lastly, the rivalry, which is the competition which tends out to what exists. So as you can see, Michael Porter is looking at how a business is being affected by some forces. These forces tend to affect your business life. And according to Michael Porter, we're looking at the threats from entrants, we're looking at customers' impact, or the rivalry or the competition which comes up, a supplier's threat, a substitute threat, right? So the first one is buyer power. Buyer power. What are we looking at here in the case of what? Buyer power. We are looking at it in the case of the customers. We are looking at it in the case of the customers. So your customers can make you laugh. Your customers can make you cry. That is why it is important for you to look at the specifications of your customers and try to give quality to your customers. You try to see their requirements, then you try to meet their requirements according to total quality management. So the buyer power. It is important for us to explain them one after the other. The stronger the power of the customer, the more pressure it can place on the company. So if you think that your customers cannot influence you, then you have to be very careful. Your customers will affect you. At the end of the day, they contribute to your revenue. If they decide not to buy from you, you are going to be taken out of business, right? So coming out with a cosmetic business, you know for sure that you're going to get customers. Mostly cosmetics, you're going to get a lot of ladies to be your customers. So how powerful are these customers? Sometimes it happens that one customer contributes about, let's say, 80% of your revenue. In that case, that customer becomes very powerful. That whatever you tend to do, the customer can affect you. So the stronger the power of the customer, I'm reading, right? The stronger the power of the customer, the more pressure it can place on the company. Issues to include the size of the customer relative to the firm's customer base. So if the customer is really huge customer, a customer who is actually contributing, let's say, 80% of your revenue, then this customer is really having a lot of power. Then we can also look at switching costs. And lastly, availability of substitute product. If there is this substitute product, your customers can decide to shift or just say that you're going to switch to move to those product, right? And if they move to such product, it tends to affect you. When they move to such product, it tends to affect you. The next one is supplier power. Threats coming from suppliers. If a supplier turns out to be the only supplier and decide not to supply you the rest raw materials anymore, you are being affected. So suppliers of materials and services can exercise power over an organization. This depends on the level of differentiation. Of the products. Presence of substitute product, right? So it tends to affect the business. Compare the power of Intel supplying company chips to the computer industry versus a sugar producer supplying sugar to a soft drinks manufacturer. You know for sure that here their suppliers tends to affect them, and the level of or the nature of their supplier and how they tend to deal with them tends to affect the business overall, right? Let's move on to competitive rivalry. The rivalry would depend on the number and strength of competitors, economies of scale, and exit barriers. There are instances where, as you tend to exist in business, you have a lot of competitors. These individuals are meeting you boot to boot. It turns out to become very complex, very difficult for some businesses to exist. They would now have to record maybe low revenue, and the low revenue may take them out of business. But if you are having the resources and you have your strategies to obtain a competitive advantage, then you can decide to look at the boot competitive rivalry strategies, where you are not going to look at being a market follower, you are looking at being a market leader. So in that regard, in fact, there's going to be stiffer competition, but you have your strategies. And the sort of rivalry that tends to come up is based on the strength of the competitors. Some competitors are really huge, and those people can bully you. They can find all strategies to even take you out of business. But it also depends on what strategy or what principles or how or what are you actually coming out with to also meet them. Irrespective of your size, it depends on your strategy. If you are even your size is even small, you can even come out with some strategy which can maybe just some few months can even make you a market follower. So it doesn't matter. You are supposed to recruit competent and very sharp individuals who can come up with strategies to come up with a change at every point in time. So competitive rivalry. And Michael Porter is telling us that as we tend to exist, we should be mindful of competitive rivalry. What our competitors can do, how they can affect us, and how we can affect them, right? The fourth one is the threat of new entrants. Threats of new entrants. New entrants are new players coming to the market. When we tend to see that the company is really doing well, we would like to also come into the industry. Coming into the industry, we'll come to compete with you guys. So we really have to look at the point where we are supposed to come out with some strategies, either prevent people from entering or you allow them to enter. But when they enter, before they enter, at least you have gotten the cream of the market, right? So in the case of Uber, if Uber was having a very good technique, before those guys actually came up, Uber is supposed to make a lot of cash, right? Before those guys actually came up. So threat of new entrants, we are saying that markets generating high returns will attract new entrants. That in turn could reduce industry profit. So as you tend to start and you are getting a lot of profit from the industry, you know for sure that people will also hear of you and would like to imitate or copy you. In that case, they will also try to come into the industry. But at the initial sense, you earn huge returns. Know for sure that when they come in competing with you, they are going to compete with you in terms of the market share. And if your market share tends to reduce, you know for sure that the overall profit or revenue will fall and the profit will fall. So barriers to entry such as government licenses can be adopted to prevent copyrights, those things, patents can be brought in to prevent new entrants from coming in, right? And the last one, according to Michael Porter, based on his forces, threat of substitute. Threat of substitute. If there are similar products, a customer will be more likely to switch rather than stay with a product when there are when the prices actually rises. Elastic demand, if there's an increase in the price a little bit, then you see customers shifting. So threats of new entrants, threats of substitute, these all tend to affect the overall revenue of the organization. And Michael Porter is telling us to look at it, right? Then we come to the next item, which is still in chapter 2, that is Porter's diamond. Porter's diamond. Michael Porter is really a strategic guy, and I like him based on how he tends to develop his strategies. If you want to obtain a competitive advantage at the outside world, then you can look at his issues according to his 5 forces. You can look at his issue according to the Porter's diamond. This is a model outlining the theory why certain industries are competitive in particular locations. So some individuals or some companies tend to become selective, maybe a particular field. Maybe you want to only get into the education industry and really do well at the education industry. If you decide in that perspective, then in fact, all resources are going to be contributed into dealing with all aspects of the education industry. And by so doing, you have become very selective. as to which industry or which era you really want to what center or to get to, right? Good. So you are saying that this model outlines the theory why certain industries are competitive in a particular what locations. So they are not competitive in every location, but instead a particular what location. And in that regard, we are supposed to look at issues pertaining to Porter's diamond. And Porter is talking about factor conditions. So we can become competitive in a particular location based on factor condition, right? We can also become competitive in a particular location based on demand condition. We can also be competitive based on the firm strategy and structure. And lastly, related and what supporting factors. If you want to obtain competitive advantage, so if you want to come up with a cosmetic business and you want to become competitive in a particular location, you can look at also Porter's diamond. We really have to learn these things and apply these things. So the strategic business leader is not supposed to look at these models just like that. Whatever model you tend to look at how can I make this practical? So as I am trying to get into a cosmetic business, how do I become competitive in a particular location? That location is being competitive in the cosmetic business, right? I can look at the factor condition to become competitive in this industry. I can look at demand conditions to become competitive. I can look at firm strategy and structure to become competitive. I can also look at related and supporting factors to also become competitive. Let's understand what we mean by factor conditions, right? So we are talking about factor conditions, and with factor conditions, let me highlight that in yellow. Factor conditions, it includes physical resources. Maybe you are only getting huge competition, or maybe you are getting the cream of the market. You are getting a lot of customers because you are the only person who is having the physical resources. That is why you are becoming competitive, or that's why you are competitive. There can also be human resources. Maybe you are the only firm which is having the guys, who is having only the personnel, the sharp brains to actually get that job done. And in that case, we will say that you will obtain competitive advantage in that location only. Specialized resources, maybe you are the only one who is having that specialized resource. And in that case, that location, because you are the only guy in that location, you are the only guy who is having that physical resources, having that human resources, having that specialized resources. In terms of factor condition, you are going to be very competitive in some location. Some firms are actually known when you come to specific tax. So in the case of KFC is actually competitive in its perspective, right? So in terms of whatever we want to talk about, we can look at being competitive. Wow, looking at factor condition. A company, I want to become competitive, I can look at factor condition. And that factor condition, if I'm the only person having the only resource, that a factor can be a resource. And so labor can be a factor. Labor as a factor market, right? So if I'm having the human resource and nobody is having that human resource, it will make me competitive in that location. So I will tend to have a lot of people coming to my side because I'm the only player in that market who is actually doing good. The next one is what you call demand conditions. Demand conditions. A country with sophisticated home buyers who demand quality, advanced, and innovative product can create international competitiveness. So if I want to get a competitive advantage, I can also look at demand. If I realize that demand to my product is going to have what you call an inelastic demand, then it will tell me that when I get into such market, if I have a product which is having inelastic demand, that means that I can really obtain a competitive advantage. So in my quest to obtain competitiveness, I'm supposed to look at the elasticity coefficient of the product that I want to deal in or I'm dealing in. If it's having an elastic demand, then that means that it will give me competitiveness. I can also look at the next one, which is related and supporting industries. Related and supporting industries. This is where we say we create alliance. Some businesses have aligned themselves to the point that if you have a conflict with one, you have conflict with the others. And it makes them very powerful. Making them powerful makes them get a competitive advantage. So related and supporting industries can produce input for a company which feed into the success of the business. So some people have aligned themselves that they can be partnership. Maybe, for example, Unique A Plus Professional Institute can align itself with another company which is providing, let's say, IT services. So our students, after going through our professional ACCA lectures, can also sign up with the IT firm, such that the student can also go there to train him or herself with issues of, let's say, web designs, those sort of IT perspective, right? Now you realize that there's a link between these two firms. That is Unique A Plus Professional Institute and that of the IT firm. And there, in fact, there's a relation between us. We are related in one way or the other. They are at the IT firm by getting IT students who want the IT student to learn issues of accounting. They can link them to Unique Professional Institute. That is Unique A Plus Professional Institute, or UPI for short, and vice versa. And here, whatever tends to happen, if UPI is in trouble, that IT firm will be in trouble, because there's that sort of interrelationship, and we provide support services among ourselves. This is what we need every individual. Even if we're a student learning, you are supposed to create a network. You are supposed to create a network. And if you are having a very good network, it makes you competitive. Some individual, if you have, let's say, if you want to buy, let's say, raw material, you can just give just a phone call to whoever you have aligned as a network, either on LinkedIn or wherever. By calling that person, because you have that sort of relationship, it's a network, the person tends to also help you at any point in time. So to obtain competitive advantage, let's look at networking. The last one is firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. We are saying that competition in the home market drives innovation and quality. Protectionism can weaken a market. So we are saying that a firm strategy, structure, and rivalry, that is competition, can also affect the company's competitiveness. So as we want to obtain competitive advantage, or as we want to be seen competitive, let's not forget about what other players in the market can also do. You can also come up with certain things like copyright to protect yourself. But if you overprotect yourself, you tend to shut the doors with that from your side with the external world. If our country is saying that it's not going to look at international trade, then one way or the other, we will also be affected. The next one, we are looking at some definitions, strategic capabilities, resources, and competencies. In our quest to attain competitive advantage, we are to look at our in-house, that is an internal strength. An internal strength, let's look at our strategic capabilities. Let's look at our resources, and let's look at our competencies. Doing or going through this will help you attain that competitive advantage. So if you want to really meet your competitors boot to boot, you cannot just say that you are just zooming in to meet them boot to boot. It has to start with the idea of you looking at your strategic capabilities, your capabilities. That is looking at the in-house, what you guys are capable of, resources and competencies. So let's look at these definitions. We are talking about strategic capabilities. These results from the organization's resources, example, machinery, and its competencies. And we are talking about competence. What do you mean by competence? That's the ability to use those resources. Threshold resources and competencies. These are the minimum required by an organization to meet customers' minimum requirements. In effect, this is what is required to stay in business. So here, what are we looking at? We are looking at all means to meet the customer's requirements, and it's based on the resources that we have and our competencies. Core competencies. There are issues of outsourcing. When we look at outsourcing, which can also be given the name subcontracting, we know for sure that you cannot outsource your core competencies. That is the main thing that you tend to do in. I all the time give an illustration that it's an individual who calls himself or sees himself as a wife turns out to cease to be a wife in instances where the main activities or rules of a wife is being delegated to, maybe if you have, let's say, somebody supporting you, maybe some lady you have in the house who is supporting your house course. If you allow her to play that wife rules, then you cease to be what, a wife. So you are not supposed to outsource that what function. You can allow that lady to be cleaning the halls and whatever. Those are not the core competence, what is actually makes you a wife. But if you tend to outsource those things which makes you a wife, then you cease to be a wife. So in outsourcing, we do not outsource issues that are our core competencies, right? We do not outsource issues that are core competencies. So core competencies, these are processes and activities undertaken by the organization that are seen as being central to their success. The core competencies talks about your vision and mission, and we do not outsource that. Core competencies are capabilities that are critical to a business achieving competitive advantage. To a business achieving competitive advantage. They provide customer benefits. They provide customer benefits and are difficult for competitors to imitate. And they're difficult for competitors to imitate. In fact, that is what makes you as a company. That is what shows why you exist. And we do not outsource that. And it becomes very difficult for competitors to imitate or to copy, right? A core competency can take many forms, such as technical know-how, customer relationships. Some businesses have aligned themselves with customers that it becomes very difficult for you to convince their customers. They have actually positioned themselves into the minds of the customers that there's nothing you can tell that customer to convince that customer. And in that case, it can be your core competence. Amazon.com has a number of core competencies, such as reliable and efficient online ordering and delivery system. That is Amazon's core competence. Then we come to other factors, which are, in fact, they are key terminologies, key knowledge, critical success factor. You look at key performance indicator. There's a difference between critical success factor and a key performance indicator. Let me make this simple. This is even seen in the advanced performance management paper. So it is important for me to explain for the student to get understanding to this, right? To get understanding to this. When we talk about critical success factor, a critical success factor can be, let's say, profitability. Let me give an example here. A critical success factor can be, let's say, profitability, right? So I can say that I am profitable. So a critical success factor can be, let's say, profitability. And the key performance indicator, for me to say that I am successful, I'm supposed to be profitable. But what will be an indicator letting me know that I'm profitable? I can look at issues like, let's say, gross profit margin. Gross profit margin. I can look at issues like, let's say, net profit margin. I can look at issues such as return on capital employed. If these ratios are showing that I'm doing well, then it will tell me that I'm being successful. If these ratios are showing that I'm doing well, then it will show that, or to portray that I'm really successful. So profitability is a critical success factor. It's a factor which shows that you are successful. And the key performance indicator will show you what are the things which are supposed to pop up for you to know that you are successful. That is what you call the key performance indicator. So the areas, another critical success factor can be liquidity. Another critical success factor can be in the light of, let's say, liquidity. Can be in the light of, say, liquidity. And its key performance indicator can be, let's say, a current ratio. Current ratio. So if I calculate the current ratio and it is above 1, that shows that I am being successful. It can also be an asset test ratio, or a cash ratio, All these are indicators, performance indicators, which shows that I'm really doing well. So a key performance indicator is a subset of a critical success factor. If you want to achieve your critical success factor, you're supposed to start with your key performance indicators. If the key performance indicators are well dealt with, then your critical success factors will be achieved. If I'm a student and I want to pass my strategic business leader, passing the strategic business leader becomes my critical success factor. But how do I achieve this passing of the strategic business leader? That is what we talk about as the key performance indicator. And if those things happen, it actually supports the critical success factor. So you are saying that the areas of the business that must be performed well if the business is to achieve its mission and its objective. Critical success factors, CSFS. Critical success factors, CSFS. Critical success factors, that is CSFS. So critical success factor, which is CFSS, FS, will vary from industry to industry and even firms to firms. Not only industry to industry, firms to firms, right? An individual or a student who wants to get 68% strategic business leader, you know whatever the student will do. A student who wants to obtain, let's say, 75% strategic business leader, you actually know how the student will also study, right? So a critical success factors vary from industry to industry, firm to firm, and even individual to individual, depending on what the person is looking for in life. An example of a critical success factor for an online food delivery company would be prompt and accurate home delivery. Right? So their critical success factor is that they look at what? Prompt and accurate home delivery. But how do you do this? How do you come out with a delivery which is going to be prompt and accurate? How do you do that? That is what you call the key performance indicator. Right? So key performance indicators measure the performance of critical success factors. The performance of critical success factor. Another model that we are looking at is the Porter's value chain. Michael Porter's value chain. Then we come to the last perspective, which is SWOT analysis, and that ends it for our lecture for today, right? Michael Porter's value chain. Porter was looking at how to create value. And in his quest to create value, he said that if you want to create value, relax. Look at the support services. Look at the primary functions of the organization. If you tend to look at all these things, it will tend to increase margins. Margins or markup are profit. And that profit tends to come if you have created value, right? So Porter's value chain, let me highlight that. Porter's value chain represent a series of activities that both create and build value. So Porter, after taking us through how to become competitive, Michael Porter is saying that now you have looked at instances of becoming competitive. Do not forget that value creation can also make you competitive. So we are to also focus on creating value. Because when you create value, you tend to increase your market base and it makes you competitive, which will make you get a lot of market share, and that will make you be on top as a market leader. So Porter, in his quest of showing companies as to how to create value, he decided to come out with what we call the value chain. And it's a chain. That means that the primary tends to lead into this support, and in fact, it turns out to come up with a to and fro movement. They are interrelated, right? Porter's value chain represents a series of activities that both create and build value. Combined, they represent the total value delivered by an organization. The margin in the diagram is the added value. The margin in the diagram, as you can see here, the margin in the diagram here represents what? Value, right? So if you look at all these perspectives, if it is well done, it will create value for the company. That's what Michael is saying. The difference between the total value of the activities and the cost of performing them. So it is like the revenue and the cost will give you a profit, and the profit here is margin. There's increase in profit if you are looking at creating value. That is why in total quality management, we're supposed to look at the requirements of the customers and look at how to achieve the requirement or satisfy their requirement, right? The model, that is the value chain model by Michael Porter, is used to help businesses identify which activities give it a competitive advantage. And we do not expect students to look at these things just like that. In the case of I'm learning strategic business leader, to just pass strategic business leader. Whatever business that you are dealing with, you can even decide to be a consultant. That is why the paper is called a strategic business leader. If you actually implement all these strategies, all these models, we will not see in instance where your business, in fact, your company is going to be a market follower, because you are doing everything possible to be at the top. And that is why we give it the paper the name Strategic Business Leader. So we expect that students are to apply all these things that they are going through in the Strategic Business Leader to what businesses. In fact, if they learn this paper, to be able to learn it well and understand the issues, anytime you come up with a model related to a business, if you have a business you are dealing with, it becomes very simple to look at that. If a student go through Strategic Business Leader and there's no impact on his practical business or the business that or real business that he or she is dealing with, then the student has not learned Strategic Business Leader. And such a student cannot even pass this paper, right? So let's look at the person and let's look at how we can apply this into real life business processes, because we are getting a lot of tools, we are getting a lot of principles, we are getting a lot of strategies to make our business grow. If you do not have any business, you can take off establishing some business. And as a result of you establishing the business, you can look at all these principles that you have gone through in the Strategic Business Leader to make your company fine, right? So we are looking at the first perspective. I'm going to explain that. So this model will help you obtain competitive advantage. In the case of inbound logistics, we are looking at issues of, let's say, the inputs that you are bringing in, operations, your strategies of your operations. Some individuals are really having poor strategies in terms of operations, and it tends to affect you in terms of creating value, right? Outbound logistics, I'll share another document with you where I'll give you the breakdown of all the items that you're looking at, the case of outbound logistics, marketing and sales, service, procurement, technological development, human resource management, and firm infrastructure. If you want to really create value for your company and you do not have the infrastructure, how do you create value? You cannot create value. If the human resource management are looking at recruiting individuals who are not sharp, who are not creative, how do you create value for your company? In fact, these employees are waiting for the top management to tell them, oh, do this, do A, B, C, D, but they are not able to think outside the box. How do you create value for your customers? How do you obtain competitive advantage if they cannot reason to come up with anything? Technological development. If you are existing as a business, know for sure that the current situations, the current ways of IT will not be the same. As you know, the existence of the pandemic COVID-19 has really impacted on a lot of companies, which some companies are still looking at the face-to-face perspective. How do you grow in that case? So we have to look at technological development. How can we grow? There were used to be times where marketing was done in a form of a face-to-face perspective, but now huge marketing in the case of e-commerce, right? Procurement, the resources that you buy can have adverse impact on the quality of your output. That is, your input can be affected. If you tend to buy shoddy raw materials, you tend to affect your output. And the output is the product that these customers are going to use. If it happens that you are having competitors and you are creating products which are not meeting our requirements, forget, we are really going to shift from you and buy from another competitor. So in creating value, look at your procurement department. Whatever you are procuring, is it going to create value? We decide on that point, we create resources at that point to meet it. Then marketing and sales, the instances where you are having everything on point, but those people who are doing the final delivery, the final touches, making sure that at least their product is actually taken to the market. They actually introduce the product to the market and not do a good job. They get in there, they are not able to publicize the product. They are not able to create a market position of their product into the heads, the minds of the customers. Then if they're having a poor marketing strategy, then how do you survive? In fact, you have done a very good job, but at the end of the day, you are not really marketing yourself to the outside world, right? You don't market yourself to the outside world. So micro-quarter value chain is just looking at how can a business create value? How can we create value? In your quest to create value, you tend to obtain competitive advantage. The last model we are looking at over here is what we call SWOT analysis. And this is absolutely applied by even individuals, firms, or businesses, and overall industry as at large, right? You are supposed to look at your strengths, you look at your weaknesses, you look at your opportunities, you look at your threats. You look at your strengths, you look at your weaknesses, you look at your opportunities, you look at your threats. Strengths, you look at internal. You have to assess yourself. Weaknesses also internal. In fact, every individual, every business is having a strength. Every business is having its weakness. We all the time look at developing our weakness. Our strength is our strength. We look at maintaining our strength, right? So a strength of a business can be resources and capabilities. A weakness of a business can be lack of certain resources or capabilities. Opportunity of a business can be external, right? Well, that is arrival of new technology. Some people have taken advantage of even the existence of COVID-19 to really get a lot of revenue. The existence of the COVID-19 or the pandemic created a new business for some individuals, and they actually made a lot of cash, not in an illegal way, but in fact in a cool way, right? Not affecting customers so hugely, but at least creating value for customers and getting benefit for the value created, right? And the threat can also be arrival of substitute product. Now, before we will end our lecture for today, it is important for students to know what issues pertain to exams focus, right? And what issues pertain to what? Practice. Now let me start with the practice. I've already hinted that as we are going through the strategic business leader topics, we are going through to apply all these things in our daily lives, right? We are going to come out with a business, then at least we try to apply all these things to make the business work, right? In the case of the exam perspective, how will exams come out? You are going to be given a case study. Then the examiner is going to tell you to assess the performance of the company. Maybe in the case of a SWOT analysis, or maybe the question is not going to tell you use this model. Sometimes you can be given the model to look at this straight away. Sometimes you don't be given. You are supposed to think through that. Oh, if the company is looking at creative value, then I can answer this question by using Michael Porter's model to answer this question, because that case study is a problem, and you can use a model to solve the problem. You can use the model to solve a problem. So we can use that, and that is what actually happens in research, where some individual come out with literature review, and they look at some model, whether theoretical literature, or look at maybe a literature based on issues which are practical in that sense, based on issues that people have written before, right? It can be either an empirical literature, or can be a theoretical literature. So if I'm basing on my research on a particular theory or a model, it is the model which I use to carve my research. So in the case of you seeing that in the question or in the case study, we are talking about value creation, then you do not have any other alternative than to look at issues of Michael Porter's value chain. Michael Porter's value chain. In the case of looking at your impact on the external environment, you can look at the pestle analysis, or you can look at Michael Porter or Porter 5 forces. If you are looking at achieving competitiveness, some people can decide to really select a particular area of business and really hit that side wall to become very competitive, to become well known. You can look at Porter's diamond. You can look at Porter's diamond, which will help you obtain competitive in a particular location. So all these things will feature in exams. But when it comes up, you, the student, have to know what to apply at every point in time. That is why I'm saying that we are not supposed to memorize. No, we are supposed to make whatever we are learning practical. And to make it practical, as a result of you going through, try to relate what you are learning to a normal business perspective. So that if we're relating it to a business, in fact, you can really make it practical, and it tends to help you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, this is where we are bringing our meeting for today to an end. In our next meeting, we'll continue with the other topic. As I've hinted, you can contact Henry. You can contact Henry via email. Let me come out with the email. You can contact Henry via email. You can contact me via, so this is the email. You can contact me by manhenry1@gmail.com, or you can maybe WhatsApp, or you can come out with issues of maybe Telegram, still using the same issues of +233 +233 right? You can WhatsApp me, then at least we can link up from this angle. So that is Henry for you, taking you through, driving you down into the issues pertaining to strategic business leader. And this is an area which is really practical. You can use it right from the point of studying strategic business leader. You can think of what creating some business to make yourself really competitive. All right. So this is where we bring our meeting